Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa
Bhagavato
bhagavato
arahato
arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa
Bhagavato arahato samma
sambuddhassa.
sambuddhassa.
So thank you. Oh my goodness, I just saw myself. Thank you everyone for coming along and having attending this Zoom thing. Tonight I thought I'd talk to you about teachers, because I've been watching recently. And I like to look at YouTube and see what Dhamma teaching is on there. And I've been watching a few things, and there are quite a few things on there about bad teachers. Dhamma teachers who are really not very good. I don't mean they're not good at teaching Dhamma. I mean they're not very good morally. And it sort of started me thinking more and more about something that I've really had on my mind for a long time, and that is, who is your teacher? You know, a lot of people say, people say to me, oh, the Dalai Lama is my teacher. Well, they might enjoy the teaching given by the Dalai Lama, but you couldn't call the Dalai Lama your personal teacher. Other people become very, very partisan, and they only listen to this one teacher and nobody else. And if that teacher says don't listen to anybody else, then they don't listen to anyone else. But if we want to really examine this question, I think we need to go back to the Buddha himself, not to other teachers, and not to me as a teacher either, but to go back to the Buddha and see what does the Buddha say about teachers and teaching. And I think the interesting thing is that in the teaching of the Buddha, the main teacher, the primary teacher, is not the Buddha himself, but is the body. So the Buddha, I'm not saying that the Buddha denies that he's a teacher, of course not. But when he's asked about, how should we practice, in what way should we practice, it's always to do with the body, and it always starts with the body. Far too often, people go running after teachers, this teacher, that teacher, excuse me, and they expect in some strange fashion that the teacher is going to do the work for them, that the teacher is going to somehow miraculously change them, remove whatever burden they're carrying and make everything wonderful, make everything good. And yet the Buddha himself says that you must make the effort yourself. And in fact, he goes further and says the great of the past, that is, the great teachers of the past, they simply point the way. You must make the effort yourself. And when the Buddha was dying, remember, we have quite a good account of this in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. The monks, of course, said to the Buddha, oh, can you appoint someone who's going to lead us after you're gone? And the Buddha said, no, you don't need someone to lead you. I've given you the Dhamma, and the Dhamma is your teacher. And then what happened? People ignored that teaching of the Buddha, and they began to develop or introduce a whole hierarchy of teachers amongst the monks, and especially amongst the monks and amongst the nuns. So now we finish up with, for example, in the Theravadan tradition, Mahanayakas in Sri Lanka and the so-called king of the monks in Thailand, the Sangaraja in Thailand. None of this has anything whatsoever to do with the teaching of the Buddha. Not a bit of it. And the trouble is that then people expect that these people and what they stand for, what they represent, is somehow going to help them on the path. And yet the Buddha keeps saying, no, 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 that's not what you need. And he keeps coming back to the body itself. This is a common human problem. This business of putting your trust in somebody who, in fact, is quite frail and fragile and has all sorts of weaknesses. Instead of putting your trust in the Dhamma, in the Buddha himself, and as he's found in the Dhamma, and then putting your trust in the community of people who are trying to practice. So in the suttas, the Buddha talks about this in a very explicit way. Excuse me. In other religious traditions, people have realized that this is a serious issue, a serious problem. And in fact, if you go back and look in the Old Testament, in the Jewish tradition, in the Psalms especially, there are quite a few Psalms that say, don't place your trust in princes, don't place your trust in horses or chariots, because they will fail you, and you will eventually, well, like them, you will eventually just fall back into the earth. In other words, you'll die. So what does the Buddha have to say? The Buddha is I think, very, very interesting on this point. And I'm going to read to you a few relevant passages and ask you to consider what the Buddha is pointing towards. So in the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha is talking to a monk called Rohitassa. And he's staying at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's monastery. And Rohitassa comes to the Buddha and he says, is it possible, Lord, by traveling to know or see or reach a far end of the world where one doesn't take birth, age, die, pass away, or reappear? Now, Rohitassa in the story is supposed to be the son of a Tevada. And the Buddha's answer to him is, I tell you, friend, it is not possible by traveling to know or see or reach a far end of the cosmos or the world where one doesn't take birth, age, die, pass away, or reappear. And Rohitassa says, wow, this is pretty strange. This is really pretty amazing. And the Buddha says, I tell you, friend, that it is not possible by traveling to know or see or reach a far end of the world when one doesn't take birth, age, die, pass away, or reappear. Rohitassa finds this very, very perplexing. And then the Buddha says this to him. He says, where is this world to be found? Because at first we think, oh, the Buddha and Rohitassa, they're talking about the world all around us. And the Buddha says, no, it is just within this fathom long body. So that's what he's talking about, that there's no way that you can escape from the body itself, this fathom long body. And Buddha goes on and says, with its perception, with its intellect, that I declare this is the world, this is the origination of the world and the cessation of the world and the path of practice leading to the cessation of the world. It's not to be reached by traveling. Now, traveling here, remember, some of you will remember a few weeks back, maybe longer now, we looked at the sutta where the person asked the Buddha, how did he cross over the flood? And the Buddha said, by not pushing forward and by not sinking. So in other words, it has to be something that does not involve, now I'm going to get this, as we might do when we're setting out on a journey. Now I'm going to go to this place or that place. and I'm going to go there by doing this, X, Y, or Z. And the Buddha says it's not without reaching the end of the world that there is release from dukkha, from suffering and stress. So truly, a person who knows with regard to the world, a person who is intelligent, a person who is a knower of the end of the world, having lived the holy life, knows the end of the world and doesn't long for this world or any other. So the Buddha keeps coming back and back and back to our experience of the body. So instead of looking out, instead of hoping that some teacher or some teaching that we might get is going to sort things out for us, we need to look at our own body, our own experience of the body, and see what does it teach us. Now, this appears a number of times in the suttas. There are two suttas called Loka Sutta, that is World Sutta, in which the Buddha goes back to this question again. In the first one, the Sutta Nipada, sorry, he says, in what respect does this word world apply? And the Buddha's answer is, insofar as it disintegrates, it's called the world. And then he says, what disintegrates? The I forms, I consciousness, I contact, and whatever there is that arises in dependence and eye contact, experienced as pleasure, pain, or neither pleasure nor pain, that too disintegrates. And he runs through the senses and talks about the disintegration of these things and says this is the world insofar as it disintegrates. Now, I've told you many, many times before, my lovely, lovely teacher, I wish you could have met him. He used to say when he was really ill, he'd say to me, what do you expect if you've got a body? This is exactly the teaching of the Buddha. If you've got a body, it's going to fall apart. And if you've got a body, the process of falling apart is going to be one which has dukkha in it, which has suffering in it. And even the Buddha experienced physical dukkha, physical suffering, towards the end of his life when he was traveling, going back to in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. He says his body feels like an old ox cart held together by bits of leather. So in this sense, then, when the Buddha uses this term loka, or the world, he's not talking about the world around us. He's talking about this world, this body, if you like, this body, this heart, this mind. And so it's a good idea to remind ourselves of this and to come back to this all the time. And if you think about the Buddha's instructions for meditation practice, that's precisely what they do. It's coming back again to the body, coming back and and staying with the body and experiencing the body, not going into a whole lot of cogitating or thinking about the body, but actually being present, experiencing the body and seeing what is the body teaching me now. We may not like it, and sometimes, of course, we really don't like it, and we can develop aversion and similar things. But that's not going to help us to develop aversion towards the body and its suffering. So I think it's very, very valuable to remind ourselves and to keep coming back to the body over and over and over again. Now, in the second of the Loka Suttas, the Buddha talks about the fragility of the body, of the world, but he means the body. And he talks about the way that the body is sustained through our experience of various things, being dependent on the ear for sound and the eye for sight and so on, and how these things are very fragile. And I think, again, of my teacher saying, if you've got a body, what do you expect? And we can ask ourselves that question with great benefit, with great fruitfulness. You know, if I've got a body, what can I expect? Or what do I expect from it? You know, do I really think I'm going to wake up in the morning, you know, looking like Arnold Schwarzenegger? Well, actually, the way Arnold Schwarzenegger looks now, I probably do wake up in the morning looking like him. So we need to be realistic about our practice and realistic about what we expect, and be willing to stay with the body. Not to try and use our meditation practice to, in a sense, if you like, escape the body, because the body is teaching us all the time, 24 hours a day, if we are attentive to it, if we're listening to it, if we're paying attention to it, not in an obsessive way, not in an unhealthy way, but in a good way. Now, in the Tejadhammo, that wonderful collection of songs of enlightenment by the very early Buddhist women, which I'd recommend to everybody to read. It's the most amazing collection of songs. There is the very wonderful and very famous song by Ambapali. And you may remember that Ambapali was a very famous courtesan, famed for her beauty. And you might remember that she ran into the Lichavis when she went to visit the Buddha, and she invited the Buddha. She was quite wealthy and very, very beautiful. And she invited the Buddha and his disciples to have a meal at her place the next day. And the Lichavis, who were really like in the sutta, they come across like a bunch of bogans, really. And they go to talk to the Buddha, and they want the Buddha to come to their place. And of course, they look down their noses at Ambapali. There's the suggestion that they might lust after Ambapali, but they look down their noses at her. They see themselves as superior. And they meet her on the way in their chariots, and they say to her that they're asking the Buddha, and she says, well, the Buddha's coming to my place. And they're absolutely astonished that the Buddha would accept an invitation from somebody like her, this famous courtesan. So here she is, famous for her beauty. You know, she has beauty, she has social connections, she has wealth, and then she becomes a bhikkhuni. And she writes this astonishing song, and I'm going to read it to you. It's long, but it's well worth reading. And it has a refrain that she keeps repeating. So this is Ambapali. She says, black was my hair, the color of bees, and curled at the tips. With age, it looks like coarse hemp. The truth speaker's word doesn't change. The truth speaker being the Buddha, of course. And here she's referring to the Buddha's teaching on the body and on impermanence. Fragrant like a perfumed basket filled with flowers, my coiffure, my hairdo. Now with age, it smells musty like an old animal fur. The Buddha's word doesn't change. Thick and lush, like a well-tended grove made splendid, the tips elaborate with comb and pin. With age, it grew thin and bald here and there. The Buddha's word doesn't change. Adorned with gold and delicate pins, it was splendid, ornamented with braids. Now with age, the head has gone bald. The Buddha's words doesn't change. Curved as if well drawn by an artist, my eyebrows were once splendid. With age, they droop down in folds. The Buddha's word doesn't change. Radiant, brilliant like jewels, my eyes, elongated, black, deep black. With age, they're no longer splendid. The Buddha's word doesn't change. Like a delicate peak, my nose was splendid in the prime of my youth. With age, it's like a long shriveled pepper. The Buddha's word doesn't change. Like bracelets, well fashioned and well finished, my ears were once splendid. With age, they droop down in folds. The Buddha's word doesn't change. like plantain buds in their colour. My teeth were once splendid. With age, they're now broken and yellowed. The Buddha's word doesn't change. Like that of a cuckoo in the dense jungle, flitting through deep forest thickets, sweet was the tone of my voice. With age, it cracks here and there. The Buddha's word doesn't change. Smooth like a conch shell, well polished, my neck was once splendid. With age, it's broken down and bent. The Buddha's word doesn't change. Like rounded door bars, both of them, my arms were once splendid. With age, they're dried up like patali trees. The Buddha's words doesn't change. Adorned with gold and delicate rings, my hands were once splendid. With age, they're like onions and tubers. The Buddha's word doesn't change. Swelling round, firm and high, both my breasts were once splendid. In the drought of old age, they dangled like empty old water bags. The Buddha's word doesn't change. Like a sheet of gold, well burnished, my body was splendid. Now it's covered with fine, tiny wrinkles. The Buddha's word doesn't change. Smooth in their lines like an elephant's trunk, both my thighs were once splendid. With age, they now resemble knotted bamboo. The truth speaker, the Buddha's word doesn't change. Adorned with gold and delicate anklets, my calves were once splendid. With age, they're like sesame sticks. The Buddha's word doesn't change. As if they were stuffed with soft cotton, both my feet were once splendid. With age, they're shriveled and cracked. The Buddha's word doesn't change. Such was this physical heap, this form, now decrepit, the home of so many pains, many, many pains, a house with its plaster all falling off. The Buddha's word doesn't change. So there we have this wonderful song composed by Ambapali and sung by her, presumably, in which she simply outlines what has happened to her, what has happened to her body. And she keeps coming back to the idea that, the Buddha pointed this out. The Buddha said, this is what happens. This is impermanence. This is dukkha. And she gives us these examples, some of which are quite humorous and some of which are quite sad, excuse me, that outline what has happened to her body that was once so beautiful and glamorous. And yet she is content because she has discovered the teaching of the Buddha and she's put that teaching into practice, and she's gone beyond attachment to the body, and she's gone beyond attachment to dogmas and teachings, because she's actually come to the experience of enlightenment or nibbana. But the emphasis for her and for many of the other nuns as well has always been on the body. And one of the one of the beautiful things about that collection, the Therigatha, is the way in which those women are in touch with their bodies. They're not sitting around thinking about Buddha's philosophy, Buddha's teaching in that sense. No, they come back all the time to the experience of what is it like to have a body. They come back to the experience of grief and loss. What is it like to lose a child? To have a child who dies, to have a husband who dies, to have a mother or father who die, and so on. So these are not theoretical things. These are things that are embedded within our flesh and blood. And this is the home, if you like, for practice. This is the ground where we practice. So when we, when we sit down to do our meditation practice, pardon me, wriggling around, when we sit down to do our meditation practice, then that's where we are. We try to stay there. And if we find that it's uncomfortable and there's suffering and so on, then we try to enter into that suffering, into that uncomfortableness. We don't try and run away from it. But on the other hand, we don't encourage it either. So we don't set out to look for it. We don't, in other words, go in for, in the Indian tradition at the time of the Buddha, this thing called tapas, which was punishing the body, inflicting pain on the body. No, we just deal with whatever the body as our teacher, pardon me, as our teacher is presenting us with from moment to moment to moment. And that's one of the great things about our entering into meditation practice, that we don't have to do anything. We don't have to be clever. We don't have to know a lot. We just have to be prepared to be patient and to sit with the body and to listen to the body, to listen to what's arising, what's coming into being, what's passing away. Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh has some lovely, things to say about practicing with the body. And I'd like to read you something that he said about this. He says, "You do not need to waste your time doing those things that are unnecessary and trifling. You do not have to be rich. You do not need to seek fame or power. What you really need is freedom, solidity, peace, and joy. You need the time and the energy to be able to share these things with others. It is possible to live happily in the present moment because, after all, it's the only moment that we have." And where do we live like that? We live like that in this body, not somewhere else, not outside the body. So we might maybe do a little bit of meditation practice now before we continue. So if you try to let yourself sit as comfortably as you can, don't get caught up in thinking, just stay gently, gently, gently with the body, with whatever it's doing now. It's no accident that the Buddha starts with, pardon me, the Buddha starts with the breath. Because apart from the physicality of the body itself, the breath is the most obvious thing that we deal with if we settle, if we allow ourselves to be quiet and to be attentive, to wait upon the body. So just take your time, let yourself start to be aware. I know now that I'm breathing in or I'm breathing out. This is not beginner's practice. This is the heart of the practice. I know, I truly know, and I'm present to breathing in and breathing out. And if we do this properly, then we are really here. We're really, really, really present. We're not rushing around trying to leave the body to have some kind of mystical experience. We're being present with our teacher. Just this body, just this breath. And this is the great teacher. This is the teacher who is with us all the time. If we just turn our heart and mind toward the teacher. So breathing in, I know I'm breathing in. And breathing out, I know that I'm breathing out. And with this very simple practice, this foundation, it doesn't take long at all before you actually begin to feel strongly present. Just this body, just this breath. Remember that the Buddha said the past is no longer with us. It's gone, it's finished. And the future has not yet arisen, has not yet come. So the only thing that we have is this present moment. Now this breath, now this breath. And this simple act, this simple act of mindfulness reunites the heart, mind, and body. When Thich Nhat Hanh was teaching, he used to use a little chant when people were doing their meditation practice. Breathing in and out, I am aware of the fact that I am of the nature to die. I cannot escape dying. And each breath reinforces that. Now I breathe in, now I breathe out. And one of these will one day be the last breath. I am of the nature to die. I cannot escape dying. I am of the nature to grow old. I cannot escape old age. And the body teaches us this every day, all day. Particularly in the way that it keeps changing constantly. And as we age, we very often experience more and more physical dukkha. And if we're not skillful, we can have a lot of mental dukkha around that as well. So recognizing and accepting, that I'm going to experience aging, maybe old age, if I'm lucky, and I can't escape it. Everything I cherish, everything I hold dear, everything I cling to today, I will one day have to let go of. And you can see this in your own experience with your own body. That we can't control everything in the body. We can't say to the body, oh, now I want you to look like this, or to do this, or to do something else. And whatever things we gather around us, like a hermit crab, this is good, that's good, something else is good. Eventually, when old age and death come, you can't do anything with them. You have to let them go, whether you want to or not. They fall away from you, and you fall away from them. And the only thing that you can truly own is the fruit of your own actions, your own, we could say, your own good karma. So we should try to cultivate gratitude, katanyu, towards the body, even as it begins to fall apart, even as it begins to disintegrate, because it still offers us the opportunity for insight and the opportunity to enter into nibbana. So we should be grateful for our bodies, and grateful especially to our parents for giving us this body. No body, no nibbana. It's very simple. When the Buddha became enlightened, he didn't somehow miraculously leave his body sitting under the Bodhi tree and take a few steps to the left, the right, or the front and become enlightened. No. He was sitting firmly rooted to the earth. When he came to nibbana, when he came to that complete freedom of heart and mind. And Thich Nhat Hanh used to finish this with this little verse, which is a very beautiful little verse. My joy is like spring, so warm it makes flowers bloom all over the earth. The earth, of course, loka, is me, is this. My pain is like a river of tears, so vast that it fills the four oceans. Please call me by my true names, so I can hear all my cries and laughter at once, so I can see that my joy and my pain are one. Please call me by my true names, so I can wake up and the door of my heart can be left open, the door of compassion. So if we recognize how central our bodies are to our practice, to our entering into the Dhamma, into the experience of the Dhamma, not theorizing about the Dhamma, because in the end, all the theorizing in the world will not end dukkha, will not end suffering. It's only by, to borrow those words from Thich Nhat Hanh, by opening the door of the heart and entering in there. And that, where is that found? It's found in the body. Again, to go back to the words of the Buddha, you can try to run to the ends of the world and there's no escape. It's only by entering into the world and really understanding what it's teaching you. So entering into this experience, this embodiment, if you like, becoming really and truly grounded, that we can hope to bring our practice and all our efforts to fruition. Just try staying steady for a few more minutes with the breath and with the body. And let yourself rest into it. Recognizing that I don't need to hand over myself to somebody else, to some other teacher or some institution, some political party, whatever it might be. I don't need to do that. If I come back to the body, if I ground myself in this experience of the body, heart, and mind, if I allow myself to touch the Dhamma as I find it here and now, if I allow the Buddha to point the way, then I can truly be happy, no matter what happens, no matter how much suffering there is in the body itself. I can still know deep happiness. But if I continue to look outside all the time for an answer, then I will just increase my suffering, increase my experience of unsatisfactoriness. So I need to take the Buddha at his word and to come back to the body, come back to the breath, come back to the present experience, and allow that to become my teacher. And I'm guided back to that experience by the Buddha himself. And I discover the Dhamma in my lived experience of the body, the heart, the mind. And in my interaction with others, I discover the Sangha, the community of those who are also trying to walk the path of the Buddha. But we have to walk the path of the Buddha as we find it in this body, this heart, this mind. We cannot walk the path of the Buddha by simply aping or copying the Buddha. I gave you the example some weeks ago of the Buddha chastising Rahula when Rahula was simply trying to copy the Buddha or emulate the Buddha. And the Buddha said, don't think that you can become like me just by copying me. So we come back and come back and come back to this experience of being embodied. This body, this breath. and allowing this experience to be our teacher. This is a teacher who does not lie, who does not deceive. We can try to deceive ourselves, but the body does not deceive us. The body presents us with exactly what it is. And likewise with the breath. So breathing in, I know that I'm breathing in. Breathing out, I know that I'm breathing out. I know that I'm present. So resting into the body and resting into the breath. Try to see what your body is teaching you in these few moments. We live in an age in which the people are obsessed with body and body image. And yet they don't accept the body. They spend enormous amounts of time and money altering the body, doing all sorts of weird and wonderful things, changing the body. Not for health and well-being, but for some mental idea. Because they can't rest with the body. They can't accept the body for what it is. As disciples of the Buddha, we try to remain with the body, to accept the body as our teacher, showing us day to day to day real Dhamma. This is the Dhamma of impermanence, the Dhamma of aging, of sickness, of death, but also the place where we can find, or we can walk the path to Nibbana, where body, heart and mind come together. There's another lovely, very short verse in the Therigatha by one of the nuns, and she says, "I wandered for alms. I leaned on a stick because my whole body was weak and trembled. And then suddenly I fell down. And when I fell, I could see clearly the misery of this poor body. And at that moment, my heart was freed." So even in a moment of distress, in a moment of collapse, in a moment where the body appears to fail, because the body's just doing what a body does, she is able to become free by recognizing exactly what is there, by recognizing, in the words of Ambapali, the truth of the words of the Buddha. So I'd like to encourage you to think about that. Think about what your own attitude toward the body is, especially in relation to practice. And to ask yourself, can I really practice with this body? Can I develop some compassion and loving kindness toward the body? Can I treat the body well without falling into the trap of overindulgence? And can I find in this body the path of practice? Can I experience the Dhamma? Can I listen to the teaching that I'm being given day after day after day? Or am I going to be like Rohitas? Am I going to try and run away from this experience? Am I going to try and flee, in the words of the Buddha, to the ends of the earth? And the Buddha says, but there is no escape. One has to come back. One has to enter into this experience as deeply as possible. And when we do, of course, we experience the heart and mind as well. So I hope that you might at least have a think about those things, turn them over within your own heart and mind, and maybe, spend a few minutes listening to the body. Not talking to the body, telling the body what you want, but listening to the body and hearing what the body is teaching you from moment to moment to moment. And just to end this little teaching, I know I've told many of you this before, but I'd just like to remind you, very often we think teaching, there has to be lots and lots of words and explanations and theories and even diagrams and all sorts of things. The greatest teaching I ever received from my own lovely teacher in Thailand was completely wordless. When he took me into the Ubosot, into the main chapel at the monastery, locked the gate, this was at night time, at about 9 o'clock at night, locked the gate and then opened the big wooden doors, and we stepped inside, and he locked the doors behind me and himself in the dark. He disappeared in the dark and went up to the front where the Buddha image was and lit one candle in this enormous space. He came back and said to me, Now we pay our respects to the Buddha. And so we bowed together and we sat down, and he never spoke another word. And I kept thinking, oh, he'll start teaching me about meditation. He never said a single word. We sat there, and then he said, oh, now we pay our respects. And we did. He went up into the front where the big Buddha image was and blew out the candle, and we left. We came out into the courtyard of the monastery, and he said to me, tomorrow night, 9 o'clock, and we did that night after night after night after night. And each night we sat for a little longer and a little longer and a little longer, but he never once gave an instruction. He never once said a word. In his own words, which he used to like using outside of that context, he used to say to me, you cannot teach people what you know. You can only show them what you are knowing. And that's exactly what he did, wordlessly, by helping me in that situation to stay with the Dhamma that I would experience in this body. The most wonderful, the most generous, the most loving teaching. Because he just sat there. He could have just said, right, you stay there, and gone back to his kuti. But no, he sat there with me. So we don't need lots of words, lots of fancy instruction. We just need the willingness to stay and to be attentive and to listen to the teaching that's found in the body itself. And with that, I might stop for this evening. I know it's a bit shorter than usual, but if you'll forgive me, we might just stop there, because otherwise I'll have to keep standing up all the time. That's my teaching from my body to myself at the moment. Aging, dukkha, but it's good because it shows us the Dhamma. Shows us the Dhamma, and it inspires us and encourages us to do something with it. So we'll just do a little blessing to finish up. And I don't know whether you'd like to chat with Meredith or with each other. But thank you very much for your attention and for coming along. Yatha varivahapura paripurinti sagarang hewang mewang itodinang petanang upakapati chitang patitang tunghang kippamewa samitatu sabe parentu sankapa chantopanara soyata mani jatira soyata Sapitiyo aviva chanto saparoko vina satuma deva vantarayo sukiti kayuko bhava aviva dhanasili sanichang utang bhachayi noja Taro Dhamma Vatanti Ayuvano Sukhang Balang Bhavatu Sapa Mangalang Rakantu Sapa Devata Sapa Bhutanubha Vena Sada Soti Bhavantu Te Bhavatu Sapa Mangalang Rakantu Sapa Devata Sapa Dhamma Bhavena Sada Soti Bhavantu Te Bhavatu Sapa Mangalang Rakantu Saba Devata Saba Sankanu Bhavena Sada Soti Bhavantu Te.
Sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu,
Sadhu,
sadhu.
sadhu.
And can I just tell people, Meredith, that many of you will remember Bruce Chatfield, who did a lot of work at Vajrasala, a lot of building work. He was the person who really converted the pigsty into the teacher's kuti, because some people wanted that demolished. And I said to them, no, it's the teacher's kuti, the pigsty. It's very appropriate. And Bruce was very unhappy with that idea. Bruce told David Denton that he thought it was terrible. What a terrible idea. When I insisted, he then went ahead and made it into a very beautiful kuti for anyone to stay in, but also for visiting teachers and so on. He did a huge amount of work when he was there. Well, Bruce died yesterday in New Zealand, and I'd written to him a couple of months ago, and he told me that he had liver cancer. And then yesterday I received an email from a friend of his who said that Bruce had asked the friend to make sure when he died that he told me that he had passed away. And so I told this friend that I would ask everybody to keep Bruce in their prayer and practice. And the second person I'd like to mention to you is Serge Bodlanders. You know, Serge has been dead for 3 years now, I think, KK, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Serge's wife died very suddenly just a week ago. She just had her 80th birthday at the start of November, and she invited me to go to her birthday lunch, but I couldn't go. And it seems that she had a fall and hit her head, and she died. So her funeral, and anyone is welcome to attend. Her funeral is next Wednesday at 3:00 at the Eastern Suburbs Crematorium. And I'm going to try to go if I can possibly manage it, but otherwise it'll be on Zoom as well. If you'd like to attend, if you can't actually travel, you might like to attend the funeral. So she was quite a few years younger than Serge, excuse me. And the family, she's got 2 daughters and a son. And of course, they were deeply shocked by this really unexpected event. But, you know, as disciples of the Buddha, we can be shocked, but at the same time, not surprised, really, that none of us knows when death is going to appear for us. So that's the 2 things, Bruce and all his good work there, and his great work at Wat Buddha Dhamma as well, when he was there. And he was living at the monastery in New Zealand and worked there as well when he became really ill. And Barbara Bodlander. So thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Bhante.
you, Bhante.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care,
Thank you,
Bhante.
Bhante. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
Please,
you.
girl, have good dreams.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bhante.
Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you,
Thank
Ma'am.
you,
See
everybody.
you. We'll see you on
Thank
Sunday.
you.
Sunday, yeah. See you on
Yeah.
Sunday.